Good sermon about divorce. Have you ever heard a sermon about divorce? I surely tried to come up with some way to avoid engaging with this challenging gospel text, but I'll always remember one of my preaching professors telling us that it's not fair to proclaim a difficult text without also preaching it. So here I am before you, trying to say something about divorce that is faithful, pastoral, and maybe even meaningful. At the outset, let me begin by socially locating myself and my own experiences around divorce. I'm 38 years old and was married just this year, so I am a real newcomer to marriage, a novice, as it were. My parents got divorced 7 years ago, so I am a child of divorce, although I was already an adult when that divorce took place. Still, my parents' divorce had a very significant impact on me. My sister is also divorced, as are 3 of my 5 aunts and uncles. So divorce is quite familiar, both among my family and my friends. And I know that divorce can be the right choice for some couples, even as I also know the many kinds of pain that divorce can cause. Human relationships are so very complex and nuanced. One-size-fits-all advice will never get them quite right, which is perhaps why the progressive church has tended to remain rather agnostic about how its members conduct our relationships, marriages, and family lives. It's difficult to say anything of substance that is anywhere close to universally applicable. In our gospel reading today, however, Jesus enters the fray without any of our modern restraint, offering up his guidance about divorce. And in a progressive place like this, Jesus' words likely feel quite unwelcome. Shouldn't we be working to reduce the shame and stigma around divorce? Jesus' brazen words make no room for the complexity and nuance of our human relationships. Now, here's the thing about Jesus' words on divorce, and it needs to be said right from the outset. Like the rest of the Bible, Jesus' words are deeply contextual, although perhaps not in the way that you might expect. So often we tend to think of the Gospels as records of things Jesus said and did, as firsthand eyewitness reports. But the fact is that 40 years separate the death of Jesus from the writing of the first canonical gospel, which is Mark's gospel. 40 years in a time when the lifespan was 35 to 40 years. So in all likelihood, Mark didn't have access to firsthand or even secondhand memories of Jesus' life and teaching. Rather, Mark's narrative is an assemblage of oral tradition along with interpretation of that tradition for a particular community in a particular time and a particular place. And this is important for us to remember. So what should we know about Mark's context? Mark's gospel was written around the year 70, just after the failure of the first Jewish revolt against Rome and Rome's subsequent destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. These were hugely painful and impactful events that affected Jewish society on every level. However, Mark's community wasn't located in Palestine. They were most likely in Rome, and they were Gentiles. So they were at a significant geographic and cultural remove from the trauma experienced by Christians living in Palestine. Still, like all early Christians, Mark's community in Rome faced deep uncertainty. When was Jesus coming back? And how should Jesus' followers be living in anticipation of his promised second coming? These same questions occupied the Apostle Paul too. In his letters, Paul spends a lot of time talking about relationships and how Christians ought to conduct theirs, in anticipation of the second coming in particular. Indeed, in his first letter to the Christian community in Corinth, written about 20 years after Jesus' death, Paul has this to say: "Now to the unmarried and to the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion." Please laugh, the 8 o'clock didn't laugh. Paul is kind of funny sometimes. In this interim time then, prior to Jesus' second coming, Paul seems to think that singleness is the preferable option. Marriage is portrayed as second best, as an unnecessary distraction from what really mattered, unless you couldn't control yourself. Paul says as much later in the same chapter, and this is a longer quote. He says, "What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not, those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they were not, those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep, those who use the things of the world as if not engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away." And I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or a virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way, in undivided devotion to the Lord. Well, by the time Mark was writing his gospel 20 years later, it had become increasingly clear that the second coming was not going to take place as soon as most had hoped or expected. Indeed, many Christians had been hoping that the Jewish revolt against the Roman occupation of Palestine might be the cataclysmic world event that inaugurated the second coming. But of course, it was not. In Rome, the Christian community faced other difficulties too. Just a few years before Mark's gospel was written, the Roman Emperor Nero had blamed the Christian community for the Great Fire of Rome. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Nero punished some Christians brutally, covering them in wild beast skins and having them torn to death by dogs. So, having endured Nero's persecution, Mark's community must have begun wondering, why are things going so badly for us? Why hasn't Jesus returned yet? And how much more suffering will we have to endure? The trauma experienced by Mark's community, as well as the dawning realization that Jesus' second coming likely wasn't on the horizon, sent many in Mark's community searching for answers. How should we be living now? Have we not been living righteously enough? What more could we be doing to bring about the second coming? The first generation of disciples, of course, had forsaken home and family to follow Jesus. And Paul was a proponent of singleness as well. So some in Mark's community must have decided that they needed to follow suit, that they needed to leave home and family to be more authentic, righteous disciples. In response to this threat of family breakdown in his community then, Mark placed a prohibition on divorce in Jesus' lips. And the rest, of course, is history. Generations have been taught that divorce is immoral, which has surely kept many families intact. But at what cost? Each person here has likely been touched by divorce in some way. And many of these experiences have surely been painful, in no small part because of the shame the church and society have overlaid upon the very basic reality that some relationships cannot, do not, or should not endure. In our society, nearly 50% of marriages end in divorce, which means that divorce is everywhere, which means that divorce is here among us, impacting our lives. So I wonder, could the church be a place that both supports and nurtures the growth of our intimate relationships, and also supports and nurtures us when our relationships end? Could the church be a place that values and supports those who are intentionally single, those who are single but seeking relationship, those who are in committed relationships or marriages, and those who are experiencing separation or divorce? To do so would require us to be more open and more honest about the state of our relationships than most of us are accustomed to being. And it would require us to cast off shame. Indeed, the God I know never, ever seeks to shame us, but wishes us to have life and to have it abundantly. And as part of living abundantly, we, the church, are called to invest in and support the flourishing of one another's relationships. Can you imagine church in this way? As a place that nurtures us in all of our loving, as a place that offers healing when love is lost, as a place that loves us into love. May it be so. Amen.